we basically published the source code to this thing. This was, a group of unaccountable, unelected bureaucrats that are basically throttling the will of the people as expressed through their four-year elections for a president. And the notion was that we need to deconstruct this, the personnel laws in particular.
Project 2025, a blueprint for conservative government in America, attracted a lot of publicity, perhaps even a certain notoriety, during last year's presidential election campaign. Some said it was Donald Trump's manifesto for government. Trump said he hadn't even read it. But in his second term, Mr. Trump does seem to be broadly aligned with a lot of what Project 2025 proposed. Paul Dans was the director and chief architect of Project 2025, and he joins me now. Paul Dans, let me begin with a topical question. Is what Mr. Trump announced on tariffs yesterday, is that consistent with what Project 2025 advocated?
Well, Andrew, it's a pleasure to be with you and the listening audience. Greetings from Charleston, South Carolina. The interesting thing, Project 2025, its policy and personnel recommendations were precisely that. They were a guidepost for a future president. With respect to trade, what's interesting is that there wasn't necessarily a consensus in the conservative movement. So what we did in that case was left two dueling chapters, one by Pete Navarro, who is now assistant to the president, talking about what we really mean by fair trade, and then one by Kent Lastman from a Competitive Enterprise Institute talking about fair trade. So, my good colleague, former colleague there, Andrew Hale, he and I probably see the world quite differently with respect to trade. I am much more of what big supporter of what President Trump's moved out on. And, but you see, we're both still in this conservative movement. So there is, to be sure, some difference of opinion, but I think, Dr. Navarro is the one working for the president, and you see that chapter of the book is a lot closely aligned to what's happening now.
And I understand that conservatives are split on attitudes to free trade, and you just explained Project 2025 had two chapters, both giving different views. I mean, I suppose the argument that some conservatives and others in the centre and the centre-left would make is that a return to the high walls of protectionism is rather backward-looking. The global trading system, which the US largely invented after the Second World War, has served America rather well.
Well, I see it a little bit differently. We are all at base for free trade, but what President Trump is saying is we don't want free lunch. There's a difference here. What's gone off the rails in the last 30 to 40 years, really starting with NAFTA and leading to the entry of China into the WTO, has been a dramatic perversion of that post-war trading platform. And what America is left holding the bag. What's happened in the Western countries, particularly in America, and I'm sure anyone driving through Britain right now could probably look out his or her window and see a shuttered factory, is a mass deindustrialization towards the South. And that has put us at a great strategic disadvantage. At the same time, it's brought up a lot of social ills. We had former factory workers who were able to provide on just one earner a very high standard of living, and that's eroded to the point today where people struggle paycheck to paycheck in this land of so-called free trade.
But President Trump talked about foreigners as plundering America, and it was really pretty tough rhetoric on that. They were scavenging America, and yet here is, for me, the key fact. You can see, you go through Allentown and so on, you can see places of great industrial dereliction. That isn't just because a lot has moved abroad. A lot moved south and stayed in the United States as well. And the key fact is that despite what Mr. Trump says, unlike Europe, unlike the United Kingdom, for decades, America has still held on to 25% of global GDP, which is a remarkable achievement with the rise of China and the rise of other emerging countries. That would suggest to me that it's actually done pretty well out of the global trading system.
Well, to be fair, I disagree. I listened to President Trump's remarks yesterday. I don't think he put this at the foot of foreigners. This is really laid at the feet of our own leadership in the past. He kept pointing at the Oval Office, signaling these were Bill Clinton, these were George W. Bush policies in the main that really undid us, and also Bush 1. But so I think we did it to ourselves, and he, to his credit, also said to foreign leaders, hey, I don't blame you. I would have done the same thing in your position. It's really what we talk about in the US is this kind of deep state, if you will, but they were brought along by wealthy industrialists, capitalists who were all too ready to basically freely move their investments out of the United States to arbitrage much cheaper labor, rates, environmental standards, and basically make cartoonishly large profit margins by importing what were formerly made in America goods back into America. So, as someone, I grew up, look, I came from blue collar families. We were like, you were right. My mom's family were textile workers in Rhode Island. That's in the north. Those textile mills moved to the south. I'm now in South Carolina, where they all moved because of the labor. They didn't have unions down here. Now those textile mills are in China. They're not even in South Carolina anymore. Now, the point of it is that the capital kept moving around. But if you go to Rhode Island, in that town, everyone's on government assistance. People are walking around as zombies. They're on fentanyl overdoses. The schools have eroded, and there's been a massive social decay. So, people like myself, I saw this back when H. Ross Perot talked about the giant sucking sound of NAFTA. And what is really inspiring now is that President Trump's the first guy to really get in that Oval Office and do something the way that we've been signaling for the last 40 years.
Let me ask you one more question about the tariffs, since it's the story of the day, and then move on to some wider issues on Project 2025. Mr. Trump says, hey, you don't need to pay the tariffs. Just come and make your stuff here in America. Then you won't be tariffed. Relocate, produce here. But he also says that tariffs will generate trillions and trillions of dollars in new revenues. I suggest to you, you can't have both at scale, can you? The more that companies relocated to America, well, obviously the less revenue tariffs would generate.
Well, yes, it's complex. I did my undergraduate work in economics at MIT, so I appreciate what you're saying. Here, though,
and I did mine where Adam Smith wrote *The Wealth of Nations*.
Okay, not bad. Adam Smith, we owe so much to in this country, and
Indeed, we do.
Take your British, exports. We would gladly, as someone speaking English, not American, right now. We haven't renamed the language. We are, we'll never divorce ourselves from England. They are our longest term, or Great Britain rather, our longest term friend. And I think people have to look in the long term aspect of this, the 10%, particularly with the UK, as Secretary Bessent said, this is a ceiling right now. And, they are accepting calls, and this is the sort of thing that Secretary Lutnick and others are going to work out with various trading partners. But that is to say, you're right, in the sense that, will it produce trillions of dollars? Well, if not trillions of dollars of export duties, of import duties rather, it is going to produce trillions of dollars of foreign investment in the United States. And that's what President Trump was ticking off yesterday. I think he said it was 6 trillion and counting. So yes, if they make this investment, they're calculating that those tariffs may stand. They're coming, a lot of those investments are coming from countries where I think there's going to be a lot of stickiness with respect to tariffs. But others, ultimately this, tit for tat is not the way to go. But the reciprocal tariffs are a no-brainer. He's actually doing what was fair all along, and he started at a very fair position of cutting it in half. So I think when you start looking at the actual trade barriers, not just the tariffs themselves, you realize it's very difficult for American businesses to sell into these foreign countries or do business. So it's a leveling of the field, to be sure.
Now, Paul Dance, Donald Trump sort of distanced himself from this document during the campaign. But if you look at what has happened since his inauguration, it's hard not to conclude that he's following quite a lot of what the document proposed.
Well, with Donald, nothing would happen without Donald Trump. We really owe, the man got up off the mat, shook his fist, and said, "Fight, fight, fight." If it wasn't for that indomitable spirit, I don't know where we would be right now. These ideas that we put forward were a collection from across the entire conservative sphere. So they're not our ideas, they're not even Trump's ideas, but many of them actually grew out of first-term Trump policies. So I think to the extent that you see a lot of commonality between the two, it's rooted in common sense. And nothing would happen without the way he's moving at it. I think he's just an incredible story of someone who suffered through this lawfare, kind of these injustices over the first term, and he's come out really seizing not just the day, but every hour and every minute. And
So why do you think he distanced himself from it in the campaign?
well, we were the product of, or actually the target of fake news, and no one has been a larger target than Donald Trump. We were kind of thrown in the maelstrom with him, and our friends on the left took the project and did a two-part misinformation strategy. First, that this was Donald Trump's. It wasn't. It was this collection of us outsiders who got together. Many of us were departees from the first Trump administration, but two, they said things were in Project 2025 that weren't. It was a lot of astroturfing and just kind of fake misinformation. So I don't, the fact that he would distance himself, he's quite right. He did not commission it. It was not for him. It was for any conservative president, but it's a reference guide. And to be sure, what we did was, I think, popularize a lot of these ideas, publicly promote these ideas, put them into the ionosphere. And what happened is, this transcendence with Elon Musk. I think that the irony of all this kind of fake news is, the law of perverse incentives, where Project 2025 is not implementing. You have now one of the most successful people in the world, in Elon Musk, a technician, coming at it and taking many of these kind of major themes and going at it as a way that he made private business successful.
So when Elon Musk took his chainsaw to government spending, was that implementing Project 2025?
Well, the central tenet of Project 2025 is that we have to deconstruct the administrative state. When we got together as a group, we said to one another, and we were disparate, like I said, with your former guest there, Andrew Hale, good colleague, former colleague of mine, we don't all see the world the same way, but we are more rooted in common themes than not. But the conservatives had typically been like a group of cats. They were always going separate ways. And what Project 2025 said is, hey, we got to get in alignment on the major things we agree about. And as we went around the room, the common point was the administrative state. That was the thing that was ultimately stopping a duly elected president from achieving these conservative policies. So, what Elon Musk is doing today is very much targeting that administrative state. We basically published the source code to this thing. This was, a group of unaccountable, unelected bureaucrats that are basically throttling the will of the people as expressed through their four-year elections for a president. And the notion was that we need to deconstruct this, the personnel laws in particular. The president has to understand that personnel is policy, and you need aligned personnel with the policies the people just voted for. And then the personnel under you are impeding that, then they either have to change direction or they have to be moved aside. And that's, I think,
But
what Elon Musk is doing in the
but
main.
conservatives tend to like less government. Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and they like government to be under checks and balances. Your solution was to concentrate unprecedented authority in the hands of a single executive at the expense of America's democratic checks and balances.
Well, that's not my idea. That's the founder's idea. That's found in our Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Clause
Sure.
1. The first sentence says, the executive power of the United States is vested in a president, period. That was some of your former countrymen who helped write that. And the point is that we do have a system of checks and balances, but the checks and balances are between and among these three branches of government. They're not from within the branch itself. That is, the bureaucrats who sit under President Trump are not supposed to be the check and balance on him. He is vested in the executive power and he pushes it down to the various agencies. So we still very much have the courts checking the president. We have Congress checking the president. You have the president having his various checks and balances on the courts and Congress. So that's where the checks and balances come from. But the idea, what's happened with the progressive era, and interestingly enough, the tariffs are, and the income tax is an invention of the progressive era, is that they created this administrative state, and the administrative state took essentially executive powers away from the president, invested in them as so-called independent agencies. And then the seminal question is independent of whom? And in turn, it was independent of the president, but ultimately independent of the people. These agencies began to be run by unchecked bureaucrats who basically have a nexus with big law, big pharma, big tech, you name it. That's kind of the symbiosis that's been built. So at essence, what we're doing in Project 2025, what we advocated for was a massive constitutional house cleaning. A reaffirmation of the executive power under the president and being able to have these agencies once again answerable to the people. That is the essence of American government, this 250-year experiment we're going on. Don't want to bring up any bad memories, but we are celebrating 1776 here next year, 250th. But that the essence of it is a government of, by, and for the people. So the people have to be integrated into this government. We don't want to have our betters determining our destiny. That's
I
the
understand.
problem.
Though you have a president with far greater powers of pardon than George III ever had. But let's move on from that. One of the strong messages in Project 2025 is that you talk about the need to root out cultural Marxism from the American state. Can you just briefly tell us what is meant by cultural Marxism?
Well, this goes back to kind of obviously the whole growth of communism in the world, starting in the early 20th century and probably even before that. But what there has been taken root through, I think you initially say the universities and maybe some of the unions, was a growth of communist element within the United States that transmuted into a philosophy that basically held sway in some of the top universities, particularly the Ivy Leagues, where a lot of these kind of princes of government are drawn from. And that, in a sense, was to deconstruct American society. We are at very bottom, at our real base, country of God, family, and liberty. And what the Marxist philosophy really was to deconstruct the family, to deconstruct the borders of the nation, and to basically go after these fundamental liberties and say, your freedom of speech, that we need to police that. So with various inventions like the DEI, kind of the green energy schemes, we've seen these kind of seedbed ideas that were once kind of crazy things that were maybe an elective course in an Ivy League school now take hold and be kind of the so-called policy of the United States when it goes abroad to Africa and says,
I,
in return for
I think
free water, you
I,
have to, acknowledge these rights.
I think a lot of people will find it quite. I mean, they know about American universities. Universities tend to be on the left, and there are other sources of. So a lot of the American media is on the left as well. I think, though, most people will find it quite hard to think that Marxism has been a major influence on American government or on policies that America has followed these past decades since the Second World War.
Well, it has. I mean, I think that's the problem. Most people are waking up to it now, but even some of this trade with the deindustrialization really robbed the people of a lot of their identity and did so in a way to make them beholden to the government. This is ultimately about individuality, which is the essence of the American spirit, the ability to determine your destiny and basically what we call pursue happiness. Um, but versus a collective lifestyle where you're just kind of giving what you can and taking what you need along the lines of the Soviet Union. So you see the push towards universal health care, the first thing the Clintons did. Maybe you don't want to call that Marxist, but it was really not free market.
The
And
Conservative Party in Britain believes in universal health care, and so does the Conservative Party in France and in Germany. They don't think themselves as Marxist.
well, we can't, we probably don't have enough time to draw parallels between conservative. Maybe that's an overused word and doesn't have quite the translation when you hop across the pond. But for us, we're talking.
Mrs. Thatcher believed in the NHS. I don't think she was a cultural Marxist.
Look, the countries have different growths. In America, it was very much this free enterprise spirit that took root in following the revolution, and that is the essence of our country. So when we're talking about conservative policies, we are always tending back towards that Southern yeoman, a farmer, a subsistence person who went and was able to determine his lifestyle, like the Western, factory
I
worker.
understand.
And
Paul
like
Dance, I'm going to have to interrupt you.
Yes.
We're running out of time. Sorry to do this. We're going to have to leave it there, but it's been a pleasure talking to you.